America seems more disunited than at any point in recent history. Its politics undermined by partisan divisions, consensus, and almost anything impossible to achieve. So what's weakened the bonds that once held this huge democracy together, and where could the discord lead? In the second of two special reports, Bob Abe's house has been to investigate.
Former Special Counsel Robert Mueller recently appeared before the U.S. Congress to answer questions about his investigation of President Trump and Russian interference in the 2016 presidential campaign.
The president has repeatedly claimed that your report found there was no obstruction and that it completely and totally exonerated him. But that is not what your report said, is it?
Correct. It is not what the report said.
So the report did not conclude that he did not commit obstruction of justice.
That is correct.
For many Democrats, there are strong grounds for impeaching Donald Trump. But with Republicans remaining firmly in his corner, it's becoming symbolic of America's partisan divide.
It's starting to look like, having desperately tried and failed to make a legal case against the president, you made a political case instead. You put it in a paper sack, lit it on fire, dropped it on our porch, rang the doorbell, and ran.
I don't think you reviewed a report that is as thorough, as fair, as consistent as the report that we have in front of us.
History is repeating itself. I would say the Trump administration is in fast competition with what happened in the Nixon administration.
John Dean is a former White House counsel whose 1973 testimony helped seal the fate of President Richard Nixon in Watergate. He also appeared before Congress recently and sounded a warning about partisan division and incivility.
There's too much polarization. You sense it in the questioning sitting here and the shots that get taken at witnesses.
President Trump exacerbates political polarization in the U.S., but it is the result of a social sorting process between the parties that began with the passage of civil rights legislation in the 1960s. It's culminated in the formation of Democratic and Republican parties made up of distinctive racial, ethnic, and religious groups.
We were at the conclusion of basically a 60-year political journey, and it's a disaster because the parties have divided over fundamental visions of the national character.
Lee Drutman is a senior fellow in the political reform program at the think tank New America.
The Republican Party basically sees the true national identity of America as in the past, a time when America was a white Christian nation. It's a traditionalist vision, and then we have another party, Democratic Party, that has a very different vision of America. It's a more secular place, it's more progressive, and it celebrates diversity.
So the fundamental problem today is that politics is no longer about battles over resources, but about battles over what it means to be an American.
Yeah, the two sides are casting each other as fundamentally un-American. So how could you possibly compromise with them?
This clash over values has led to the sorting of the parties along geographic lines. In the 2016 election, Trump won decisively in the 2,300 counties that make up small-town and rural America. But in cities, Hillary Clinton beat Trump in a landslide. Continuing our investigation into toxic partisanship in the U.S. by focusing on North Carolina as a microcosm of the nation, we headed for Charlotte, the biggest city in the state.
Some areas of the state, it's very hard for a Democrat to get elected, and now the cities, it's very hard for a Republican to get elected. And in the metropolitan area is a group of people that tend to be highly educated, more moderate to liberal in their views. It's white and black, and the rural areas are becoming whiter and older, and metropolitan areas are becoming more diverse.
8% of North Carolina's population is foreign-born, 51% from Latin America. Manolo Bentancur, who owns this bakery, immigrated from Colombia 19 years ago.
When Trump decided to run for president, that's when I got involved with the Democratic Party, mobilizing the Latino vote.
59% of North Carolina's Latino population is U.S.-born, but there are about 100,000 undocumented immigrants in Charlotte.
Did things change once Trump was elected?
Yes, a lot. They're destroying families, taking fathers and mothers away from their kids.
In Charlotte, illegal immigrants were being deported with the help of the local sheriff who was working with Federal Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, under a program called 287G. So Bentoncourt and a group of local activists helped elect a new sheriff.
Basically, 287G expands the reach of ICE. It deputizes local sheriff's deputies to place foreign nationals into removal proceedings.
The 287G, we were well aware of what the problems were with that and how women were suffering and afraid to go places. Children were not attending school out of fear that something would happen during the school day.
Before the sheriff's election in May 2018, activists hit the streets with a scorecard highlighting the differences between the incumbent Erwin Carmichael and his challengers. The American Civil Liberties Union also ran radio ads.
Carmichael's challengers, McFadden and Inslee, they pledged to stop working with Trump's deportation force.
Gary McFadden, a homicide detective for 27 years, won, becoming the first African-American sheriff ever in Charlotte. On his first day in office, he ended his department's involvement in 287G.
We already had communities with mistrust. No matter what happens in a community, the community says you do not tell the police. And 287G just compounds the problem because of fear that you will be deported or you'll be targeted by ICE.
Do you think a lot of folks got caught up in the deportation process who shouldn't have been because of 287G?
Yes. A lot of people got caught up for small crimes, driving with no license, seatbelt violations. As long as you got into the criminal justice system, you were part of the deportation process.
ICE responded to McFadden's decision to end cooperation by mounting an aggressive enforcement effort in Charlotte, accusing him of being soft on crime.
So I take offense that you said that I may be letting someone out of jail who's dangerous.
McFadden and other sheriffs of North Carolina's largest urban counties are now battling legislation pushed by Republicans that would force them to cooperate with ICE or be removed from office.
Do you think there's any way to compromise with people who favor aggressive ICE enforcement?
Absolutely not. How do you compromise on taking the father out of the home and leaving a mother with her children destitute with no support? There's no way to compromise.
There is no compromise. They're doing the same thing that they did in slavery. They just picked another group of people to do it. Now you can keep the country growing by making people disposable. When you get tired of using them, you brand them the enemy, and you send them back to Mexico or Central America.
Like Republicans in Washington, D.C., Republicans in North Carolina representing rural districts have been accused of fueling partisan tensions by pushing policies on immigration and other issues opposed by urban residents.
Republican legislature in North Carolina is bigfooting the cities because the cities are more liberal and more democratic and they're conducting policies they don't like.
What's driving the differences on immigration?
Very sharp difference about whether it's good for the country to have a lot of people coming in from Latin American countries or it is somehow eroding Americans' authenticity. In some cases, it is economic competition.
What do you think is at the root of the urban-rural divide?
So we have one half of the state that's dynamic and it's growing fast. Their young people are leaving the small towns and rural areas to come work in Raleigh or Charlotte because that's where the jobs in the future are. And the other half, you have a dying North Carolina. The rural areas are really struggling with economic decline. And so, of course, you're going to have a huge urban-rural divide if that's the case.
To better understand the economic causes of the urban-rural divide, we headed west to the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. It's an area with conservative leanings and bluegrass music. For most of the 20th century, you could also find humming textile mills and furniture factories in small towns here that rivaled industry in the American Midwest. But in the early 1980s, that all began to change.
So how long have you been involved in economic development here?
About 30 years.
Chuck Mosley witnessed firsthand the decline of the textile and furniture industries in the Burke County town of Valdez and the surrounding area.
We had about 7,000 people that would be here during the day in our little town. But now we probably got 2,000 people that work in our town. And so that's quite a difference. This is the Alba Wall Dention plant, and it shut down about 81 or 82. They were one time rated about 5th in the world in hosiery business.
What kind of impact did that have on the economy here?
Major impact, because that was our #1 source of income for Valdez.
Valdez and the neighboring town of Lenoir in Caldwell County also lost thousands of jobs in the furniture industry due to imports from Asia and the outsourcing of production to the region.
We were so focused on furniture and on textiles, people weren't trained to do anything else. So when those jobs left, they just had to take whatever was left over.
I saw that actually the unemployment rate has improved a lot.
They're finding jobs. The biggest problem is that they're barely above minimum wage.
So this looks like a shutdown plant.
We've got them all over the area here, I can guarantee you. I wouldn't be surprised if Caldwell County didn't lose probably 10,000 jobs in the furniture industry here.
To what extent did workers blame the trade deals for the economic problems that they're facing?
You hear a lot of it, they say, hey, wait a minute, let's bring that industry back and do it in America again.
Is there a lot of resentment among workers here that the politicians let them down?
At the coffee shop, that was the talk. They are more interested in the dollar from Wall Street than they are the people that are making the furniture and the families they're raising in this country.
During the 2016 presidential race, Donald Trump's campaign targeted North Carolina voters in hard-hit industrial areas.
We're living through the greatest jobs theft in the history of our world. A Trump administration will stop the jobs from leaving America and from leaving North Carolina. Believe me.
Trump received 67% of the vote in Burke County and 73% in Caldwell County, record levels of support for a Republican presidential candidate.
Trump was saying stuff like, we'll bring manufacturing back, I care about the little people.
Support for Trump and nostalgia for America's past were evident in Valdez at Mira's Classic Car Cruise-In on Friday night.
I think Trump's doing great. Yeah, it may offend some people or whatever, but his policies are working for your average American.
I think a lot of people were looking for a big change, and Trump is not a politician. He doesn't look at things the way typically, quote, politicians look at things.
Do you think people in this area support President Trump in terms of his policy on immigration in America?
I think so. I'd say 80%. Most of the people here are what you call locals. They grew up and everything was lily white, and that's the way they want it to be.
A country without borders is not a country. I mean, if you look at it, heaven has a wall and strict immigration policy. Hell does not. If you want to be here, then you need to come in the correct way.
Why do you think President Trump did so well in this area in the 2016 election?
Trump came in and said, let's make America great again. Come on, let's get our industry going. Let's get our manufacturing. We need to be making things.
When Donald Trump talks about American carnage, as he did in his inaugural speech, he is talking about places like Caldwell County and Lenoir. It resonates with those people because there's been an emptying out of those manufacturing jobs. You're seeing a whole decline in their whole civic culture that's going on there. That's why you have these really deep-seated problems like increases in suicide and opioid use and out-of-wedlock births. And it's not just those areas, but all rural North Carolina and a lot of rural America.
The appeal of right-wing populism in small-town and rural areas left behind by economic change plays a major role in the hyper-partisanship in America today. But there is also a critical cultural dimension. That became clear in Elkin, a town just an hour up the road.
We liked small-town values, and we certainly appreciate and uphold the Bible. These things are still very important, and we don't want that to change.
Stephen Harris was born and raised in Elkin and is now a columnist at the town newspaper. So this is an area where evangelical Christianity is very strong.
Yes, and President Trump supports or appears to support the traditional American values that are so important here. You know, we're seeing things that our parents would never dream would happen in America, such as abortion and same-sex marriage.
White evangelical Christians represent 26% of the American electorate. They are Trump's most loyal bloc of support, and he has advanced their agenda on relations with Israel, judges, abortion, and LGBTQ rights. Folks on the other side think that not taking action on climate change is immoral, that not allowing people to choose who they want to marry, is immoral. Do you respect that they feel that they're standing on moral ground too?
I do, but if we do follow the Bible and its teachings, that would be the best path to go. And I would disagree that climate change is a moral issue. It's an economic issue. It's a battle over government control and taxes.
But it's a moral issue if it affects our children, if the planet becomes uninhabitable.
I don't believe that will happen.
It's a big bet, though. It's a big bet. If we don't do anything, then it's a problem.
It is, but you know, we know that God is in control, and we'll trust Him for our future.
The divide between white Democrats and Republicans is really now between Christians and people who are not religious at all.
In her book Uncivil Agreement, Liliana Mason argues that the sorting of the parties along religious lines also fuels extreme partisanship in the U.S.
In the 80s and 90s, we saw the religious right become involved in politics, and they chose to unite with the Republican Party, which means that now we wrapped religion into partisanship as well. And evangelical Christians hadn't really been involved in politics before.
Many in a group of people from Harris's community felt religion was at the root of divisions in America.
There's a huge divide in the urban areas and rural, and a lot of it is based on religion.
You had group prayer in your schools. It's like when I went to school, you did the Pledge of Allegiance first thing. You can't do that anymore. Nobody respects the flag. You know, they've taken God out of everything.
Trump's economic message also resonated in Elkin, which lost a textile mill that was the linchpin of the local economy.
You know, he made promises of bringing jobs back.
Everybody sort of equated him with New Hope.
They're getting different things to come in, and, you know, wineries and vineyards and things come around now, but that's bringing some tourists in. But I don't think it's going to completely recover.
While rural America struggles, the president stokes partisan tensions with misleading claims about Democratic support for illegal immigrants.
The Democrats want to sign them up for free health care, free welfare, free education, and for the right to vote.
They're illegals. You know, they should not take what is ours, what we have earned. And I think there should be very stringent laws and policies to keep them from taking our resources.
Are you concerned about the divisions in the country today?
The division is probably getting worse almost by the day.
Why is that?
People just keep digging in deeper to their positions.
It's just you're a Democrat or you're a Republican, and they're going to vote for that no matter what is who or is running.
There is a division there, and I think it will continue to escalate. You have your economic classes, you have your races, it's the different religions, and everybody believing it's the my way is the only way.
I don't believe any president in history of this nation has been attacked more than Donald Trump.
An evangelical leader who's been a vocal critic of Democrats is the Reverend Franklin Graham. Son of the evangelist Billy Graham, he participated in President Trump's inauguration. We met with him at the North Carolina headquarters of the Christian relief organization he heads. How concerned are you about the social and political divisions in America today?
Well, I'm very concerned. It is ripping some sections of our country almost apart, and it shouldn't be. I don't think we're as divided as we were in the Civil War when the nation was ripped apart. And I hope that never happens again, but it could. Who knows?
You suggested that President Trump won because of divine intervention,
yes.
That it was part of God's plan.
I believe that. How else can you explain that he won the election? Everybody was against him.
Don't you think mixing religion and politics like that can fuel polarization in the country? To suggest that a president was chosen by God?
Well, I don't think it's divisive. I think it's just a fact. And if you think this is divisive, take it up with God.
Why do you feel you can give President Trump a pass when he committed adultery?
Wait a second. I didn't give President Trump a pass on that. First, that's not something that is current in his life. That's not since he's been president like Bill Clinton.
But you criticized President Clinton for the lying at the time. And now President Trump, of course, seems to lie regularly.
I don't agree with you. I'm not sure what lies you're talking about, to be honest with you.
Well, I mean, there have been fact-checking about a lot of the president's comments.
Well, wait a second. Who fact-checks the media? And the media gives far more lies than what you're accusing the president of lying.
Which one are you talking about, Fox or others?
Well, I'm talking about all have a problem in this country.
Are you concerned that many Americans see President Trump as a divider rather than a uniter?
I don't think he is a divider, and I think he is a uniter. He has certainly united millions of people behind him.
I mean, people on both sides feel strongly that their moral positions are valid and that the other side is imposing on them. How do you bridge that divide?
Only God can do this. I think if all of us, Democrats and Republicans, would turn our faces back to God and ask for His help, I think we can come through these problems very easily.
We have a Constitution too, and the Constitution talks about freedom.
Sure.
And it has a moral foundation. Are you saying that the only morality that matters is the morality of the Bible?
Yes.
But not everyone interprets the Bible the same way.
The false moral narrative of religious nationalism and white evangelicalism seeks to make things okay as long as you're against gay people, for prayer in the school, against women's right to choose, for guns, for tax cuts. They say that you're all right morally.
Reverend Barber, who launched the Moral Monday movement in North Carolina, is now spearheading the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival.
You got 62 million people working for less than $15 an hour. Some have to get food stamps and live in cars because they work every day and they don't make a living wage. Something like 30 million people without health care. A country cannot continue to stand with that kind of gross inequality. So we're saying it's time for us to come together to fight for the heart and soul of this democracy.
The extreme partisan environment in the U.S. has people in Charlotte worried that hosting the Republican convention next year will be much different than when Democrats gathered here in 2012. Are you concerned that the political divisions today could lead to violence?
Oh, it will. I know that it will. We're concerned it's going to bring something totally different temperatures of America from 2012 to 2020. Totally different temperatures of America.
There is even worry that President Trump will contest the election if he loses in 2020.
I think it's a serious concern because he will think that he can intimidate his way into staying in the White House if he loses. And he will be surrounded by a conspiracy view that Democrats stole the election from him.
Do you think America may be so divided today that it's no longer capable of safeguarding its democracy by impeaching a corrupt president as envisioned by the founders?
I don't think Richard Nixon would be impeached in today's environment. I think people would essentially rally around Nixon along partisan lines.
I'm optimistic that these times will straighten out and America will be only on an upward course in the future.
Stephen Harris's grandfather, 5 generations back, whose gravesite was recently discovered, was in the personal guard of the American Revolutionary War hero George Washington, the first U.S. president. Do you think if President Trump loses the election, that he'll leave the White House?
Sure. Yes, of course he will. Everyone has before, including George Washington, and yeah, he will.
What should the politicians be doing to try to overcome this vicious partisanship?
Start talking about what's good for the country and not talk about winning.
At every hearing that we've seen so far, the Republican House members defend Trump. The mechanism of impeachment only works if people in the president's party are willing to condemn him and to vote to remove him, which is what happened with Nixon. I haven't seen any evidence that Republicans are willing to do that today. They'll protect Trump as long as his voters are still supporting him. This is something that actually George Washington warned about in his farewell address. He actually said, if we become too partisan, we divide ourselves against our own nation, and it will harm us if we put too much power into the parties, truly sacrificing the national greater good for the partisan victory.